Hello and welcome to another episode of Needle Stack. I'm one of your hosts, AJ Nash, and I'm joined by
Robert Famosi.
That's right, and we're happy to be here again today. We've got a fantastic guest. We want to jump right into this very cool show. I don't think you need our introductions anymore, but I do want to introduce our guest today. He's Nico Dekens. Nico, also known as Dutch OSINT Guy, Nico Dekens. He's the Director of Intelligence and Collection for Shadow Dragon. He's got over 20 years experience as an all-source intelligence analyst at Dutch law enforcement. He's analyzed murder and international narcotics cases, stolen art cases, gang violence, political disturbances, online jihadist groups, and conducted several online covert virtual human investigations. He's also worked as a senior project manager at Bellingcat, an international independent investigative research collective, and as an all-source analyst specializing in open source intelligence, online human intelligence, and online investigations. Online, Nico is actually known as Dutch OSINT Guy. He's very active within the OSINT community, so I'm sure many of you have already heard of him or seen him or talked to him. And he's also the owner of Dutch OSINT Guy Intelligence Services. Nico, welcome to the show. Is there anything I left out of your bio that you want to add?
No, man, it was a lot of words, and thank you. Appreciate you pointing that out, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Oh, it's good to have you, man. Listen, it's a sign of a long and interesting career, right? I mean, you've been around for a long time, and everything mentioned there was important enough that it needed to be included. Dutch law enforcement, Bellingcat, which is an incredible organization, and of course, Dutch OSINT Guy, the work you're doing, independently as well, and obviously Shadow Dragon, where you're the Director of Intelligence Collection. So I think these are all really important pieces to a career. I've been a big fan of yours, in the community for quite a while, so I'm excited to have you in today, and we're going to talk a bit about your past and what do you see, currently as great techniques to use and some of the other bits and pieces on OSINT and, whatever else comes up in AI as we talk through this really quickly. So I'm very excited to have you on. So I appreciate it. As we jump in, we should probably first talk. I said a little bit about the past, like I gave some of the information here, but can you talk a little bit about how you got started in open source intelligence and what your background was there? What interested you in this field? Did you come through the military, for instance? Did you come through as a civilian or academia? Like, how did you start in this industry and build such a cool career?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so actually, I was never in the military. I was one of the few guys that was not having to have mandatory military training, which for me was okay because then at least I could do my nerd stuff. And I'm a nerd at heart. I always work with computers. I got my first Ataris, STs back in the days. For those who are old enough to know what the kind of computers that are, Commodores, Amigas, and that basically got me excited into everything that has to do with data and data collection. I always wanted to solve puzzles. So from a very young age, I was just looking at computers to work as an assistant for me and make my life a little bit more efficient. And especially when the internet started to get booming, I got very early access to the internet, not always appreciated by my parents because at that time it was still a phone line and no one could make a phone call because Nico was occupying the line with the internet, which also led to very expensive bills where my mom was definitely not always happy with. But that really got me excited. That really opened doors in me being able to see there's a lot of value online in general. Then I started working at the Dutch government, first as a street cop because you had to be a mandatory street cop before you could opt into any other, jobs. But after a year, it immediately came apparent to me, I want to be an analyst. That was almost instantly clear to me. So I was able to skip a bunch of ranks and immediately become an analyst. Started as an operational analyst first. And this is where it really opened my eyes for open source intelligence. When I was doing criminal youth gang investigations, what really resonated with me, internal databases painted a picture. And then they allowed me, or at least I pitched to leadership, hey, I can see these individuals online. Do you want me to do an analysis on their online footprint and see if that is comparable to what we see in their internal databases, or maybe it paints a different picture? And long story short, it painted a totally different picture compared to what they knew from internal information. And that really helped enrich that information and get a better grasp of who was leading the pack, who was a foot soldier, and that kind of stuff. So that opened the first doors. And now I'm talking almost 30 years ago, that really opened the first doors and first steps where at that point, it wasn't even called OSINT. It was just called the internet, and you can find the information there. And slowly, we started to professionalize. At that point, I was the only guy in the Dutch government basically doing this. There were I think a handful of other people trying to explore it. So we teamed up. We started educating each other. And before we knew it, we had units running. We provided training internally and externally to partner law enforcement agencies in Europe mostly. And well, now I'm here, for example. It brought me a long way, just being out there and sharing information and how valuable open source intelligence is. But in all reality, it all started with looking into criminal youth gangs in the Netherlands.
Well, and what you're describing sounds like the basics of network nodal analysis. Like before that was a thing, right? You're talking about actually going out and mapping networks. So who talks to whom, and like you said, that kind of rank structure. It's fascinating. 30 years ago, right? There wasn't a lot of that going on, back then. And by the way, when you talk about tying up the internet, for anybody too young to know what that's like, if you've never seen dial-up internet before, it could take hours just to download a song. So it was, it's hard to imagine now that we have so much available so quickly. But yeah, if you wanted to get on the internet, do anything, it seemed to take forever. But hey, Rob, I think you had a question. I think I jumped on you for it.
So when you were online 30 years ago, I remember BBSs, I remember forums. Is that what you were looking at? Because we didn't have social media. We didn't have all the stuff we have today.
Yeah, especially in the beginning, it was mostly bulletin boards, IRC chat channels, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, early 90s, the social media started to pop up, the MySpaces and the Facebooks of this world. And that really opened the doors on seeing what people shared online. And yeah, that was just funny to see how you could map out that data. At that point, we were using things like Analyst Notebook, and there had no internet connectivity. So it was manual searching, collecting that into a database, importing that into another database. And that's also something, just like you said, the internet was slow. So this is where I learned as an analyst to have patience. And that's something that I'm seeing, that not every analyst nowadays has patience because things have evolved. But I think it is a profession that requires a lot of patience in general.
So behind all the nicknames and everything, how were you deriving the personalities? How were you associating the names to physical bodies?
Yeah, that's a good question. At that point, that was fairly easy because most sources didn't have, let's say, good privacy or decentralized data sources. So as soon as someone set up an account, 90% of all times I could see based on a username or let's say someone's official birth given name for first and last name, I could find their email addresses and phone numbers and pivot off that to enrich it. That has changed, and also for the good, because I'm a big advocate for privacy in general. But again, at that point, there was little to no privacy, especially in the early phase of the internet. People just dropped everything, and not everything was encrypted. The entire internet was HTTP. So yeah, you could just grab everything and everything was there.
Good point. It wasn't designed for security, right? The internet was originally designed by scientists for sharing information, right? It wasn't meant to be a public network for security. And then the first people that are getting involved, boy, I mean, what a great honor if you have your email addresses like just first name dot last name at Hotmail or Netcraft, Netscape or whatever was available back then, right? I mean, people wanted their real names, right? I mean, that'd be awesome if you could have just your name. And there's somebody out there who's like Bob at Hotmail. He was the first Bob ever at Hotmail, right? What an awesome email address to have. So simple, right? Now you have to have numbers and letters and all this other things. So yeah, people were putting their own content because they weren't thinking about it. Nobody was thinking about being traced back or tracked. But it is interesting how much harder it still would be in the terms of, the internet was so new, right? The cross-referencing wasn't the same as it is. I mean, I imagine you were pulling up phone books and maps and gazetteers and things like that to try to track people back. Nobody listening to this even knows what a gazetteer is probably, but it's old military mapping stuff. So in that regard, it was a more complicated field, but I imagine it was pretty interesting for you as somebody who's so inquisitive to be able to go through all these different sources and try to pull back the information and come up with some really cool networks. Were you at the time, were you innovative when you said, "Hey, I want to go do this. I want to track people's social media back to the human"? I'm guessing you were one of the first to do that, at least in your environment, if not globally. Was that a novel idea? Was it hard to sell to people I wanted to do this and show them how it was accomplished, or were they just excited to see you do it?
Mix of both. Some were very excited to see it. Some were very hesitant because hey, are we now violating rules, regulations, laws, and that kind of stuff? Or they were just scared of the internet in general. It's just like a scary place. We don't know what to expect from it. But also I had to really fight to get good gear and training. I always made the analogy that every street cop gets a baton, they get pepper spray, they get a weapon, they get everything. But when you do digital investigations, I need gear as well. I need hardware. I need software. And it took, I think, especially the early 90s, or let's say the early 2000s, it took almost 5 years to convince leadership to give me a good quality laptop just to be able to do my work. And I was just like, hey, why are you giving everybody a SWAT car and everybody? But I just need one laptop and an internet connection. I need that to do that work. You expect me to find information online? Well, cater to me. And that took a very long time. And luckily that landscape has changed across the board, I think on a global scale. But in the early stages, I also remember vividly, I had one leader that said, hey, Nico, don't focus too much on the internet. The internet will go away. Well, little did he know. Maybe not. But that was the battles that I was fighting at that point. Yeah. And that was hard. That was hard, especially older leadership that were very old school and very classic, trying to convince them that there's a new digital world opening up. That took some time.
It's funny. It's like somebody saying, the car isn't going to be around long. Don't worry. Don't get excited about a car. Where horses are here forever. Don't get excited about that fancy motor thing. That's not going to work. It's hard. It's hard, I'm sure, to look back now and realize, like, now it seems obvious that the internet was going to take over the world. But I guess then it might have been more difficult. So I do have a question. You mentioned patience, right? And especially growing up in the industry when you did, patience was required because, like we said, dial-up internet took forever. And there weren't a lot of places to cross-reference. It was going to be a slower process. And we all grew up, I'm going to age myself, we all grew up in an era where there was a little more patience. We grew up before microwave ovens, or at the beginning of microwave ovens. We grew up when there were 3 television sets, 3 television channels, and news came on once a day, right? The newspaper came to the house. Like, things were slower, right? So there was a patience that was required. And now it seems like we have almost no patience throughout our whole life. Everything's very fast. And I've seen the same thing with research, right? With there's a lot of pressure, right? This is a business. This is an industry. There's a lot of pressure to get things done fast. And there's the old adage that, you can get it fast, cheap, or right. You can't get all 3 of those. You might be able to get 2. You're definitely not getting all 3. How do you see that, evolving? How do you see the pressure for speed impacting quality of intel? And specifically, I'm going to lean into this because it's going to come up anyway. Where does AI fit into that? Because I see a lot of people that are quick to go, well, AI is just so fast, right? And I mean, I can flood you with all sorts of stuff. It's garbage, but you won't know the difference, and it's fast, and it'll meet the metrics, and we can move on. So I know it's kind of a multi-phase question, but how do you feel about the speed and the pressure to speed things up, and where people are going with that, and the risks of using AI as the solution for some of that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important topic that we need to touch upon. I think we all know those use cases where on Friday, 4:00, when you're about to go out for the weekend, some leadership comes in and they want an answer yesterday. That just doesn't work. I need to do an intake. I need to understand how much information is out there. I need to give you a good grasp of, hey, this is what you're expecting me to do. That will take me at least this amount of time to do some preliminary research because I need to understand where to look, but more importantly, where not to look. And that takes time. And then you want an answer, and then you want a report. So it takes time. It takes planning. But also people forget the processing and exploiting and the actual analysis also takes time. I think for me, most of the time, the easy part is the collection part. As soon as I figure out these are the goals and the constraints, finding and gathering the data is not that hard, but you need to spend enough time to really thoroughly analyze, because in the end of the day, someone takes your end product and makes new decisions upon that. And this is where I think leadership very often do not understand well enough how much work a typical open source intelligence investigation may involve. And of course, we have better capabilities and better tools. Heck, I work for a company that builds great capabilities to do that. But still, the end of the day is you need someone sitting behind that computer that makes sense of all that data that's coming out of either a tool or AI, just like you said. I think when you look at AI or ChatGPT or just in general, all these large language models, they are definitely getting there, but they're also making us lazy. And this is where I recently wrote a blog about that I see now too many analysts that are asking ChatGPT or Claude or whatever a question, and they just take that answer for granted. And it makes sense because when you look at the output of a large language model, how they choose and formulate that answer and how it populates on your screen, it looks really convincing. But rarely do they show how they source that information, and rarely do they show what it means. So I think a typical OSINT investigator or analyst should definitely use AI, but they should challenge the outcome way more. And they should try and validate that. And that ties down, you should know traditional tradecraft, because that's the only way for you to validate that. If they give you a suggestion or a hint, hey, your suspect may be connected to this location or something like that, you got an answer from a black box. Now try and validate that through traditional sources. So that's what I'm a strong advocate for. I don't know what the future will give us. I do see improvements. I use AI a lot to help me as, let's say, a junior developer sitting next to me for quick and dirty one-liners, because I know how to program, I know how to code. But if I need to whip up something that's a little bit more complex, and I don't do this as a daily basis, this is where AI can be very useful. Hey, this is my idea. This is my goal. This is what I don't want you to do. Now give me the code. So I can then also be in control as a user, because now I have maybe a Python script that I can use, but I can also now review that Python script if it's not doing anything that makes me feel highly uncomfortable communicating with a secret server somewhere in, I don't know, China that I don't want to have. So that's something that's a good thing from AI. But I think in general, AI, typically for what we do in the intelligence space, people should challenge it way more, and people should be way more in control when it comes to controlling that system and understanding how the system gives you answers.
Yeah.
So you bring up a good point. Some of the people coming into the field today are digital only all their lives, and they don't remember the old school ways. And I do. But so where I'm going with this is in the OT space, which is where I do my podcast. They talk about a day without technology, where they try to go through and can they manually run the water district? Can they manually do things in case the network goes down for whatever reason? Is there an opportunity then in the analyst space to just say, like, for the next case, you're not doing AI at all and you need to go old school just to bring people up to speed and get them that skill set that they may be lacking?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it really depends on the organization that you work at. But in general, I think every organization should give an analyst or an investigator that room to be able to do things manually. This is why I was always a strong advocate for what I like to call nerd time, never-ending research and development. Why? Because you need to be able to do things manually. I remember vividly, for example, a couple of years ago, there was a tool that everybody in the OSINT space used, was called Twint. It was the best tool to, for free, do things with Twitter, from an open source intelligence perspective. Then Elon Musk took over, Twitter, turned it into X, and the tool broke. Which I had people reaching out in my email, hundreds of people reaching out. Nico, I need help. I'm blindsided now. I'm like, well, if you know how to search Twitter itself, the platform, you can still find the information, but it's just not scalable now for the time being, unless people start figuring out how to update the code for that little project, or come to the conclusion that it's just broken and you need to rely back and go back to traditional tradecraft. So this is why, and I'm hoping that answers your question a little bit more, Robert. I think traditional tradecraft is always key, because tools will come and go, platforms will break. And the only way to tackle that is to be able to do things manually and not fully rely on a tool. And we need tools, but we also need to understand tradecraft. And it's also probably the only good way for you to explain in court, for example, how to explain the crumb path that you took from A to Z.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. You can't just say, well, the machine told me, right? I've been down this path before. And listen, I use AI as well. Like you, I use it, and I spend more time tinkering than I care to admit. I just wrote something on LinkedIn about this, that I'm finding out a lot of times I finish projects and I realize the full time, if I'd done it just manually, it probably would have been about the same, frankly, because I go back and forth in circles with AI. It help me, challenges me, and makes me think a little bit more sometimes. But I've been down this path before. In the government space, I've had these discussions going back decades when I was in there, and we were on a project that was building cyber intelligence preparation of the battle space at the time, which became cyber intelligence preparation of the environment, is now known as kill chain, by the way. But the idea at first was they wanted to have this whole mechanism. We were building this whole thing, and it really was like a black box. You pour a bunch of information in, and it'll give you an answer. And I said, well, that's never going to work in the intelligence world because I can't trace that back. So we've got to find a way to be more transparent, because intelligence analysts won't use that tool, because our job is to provide answers to people who are going to make decisions based on those answers. And we're going to have to justify it. If we put bombs on the wrong target, we're not going to be able to say, well, the box told us to. That's not going to hold up. It's not going to hold up in Congress. It's not going to hold up with military leaders. And we have the same thing now. You can't just say, well, Claude said to do it, or ChatGPT said so, or Gemini said so. You're going to have to be able to validate and back it up. And I fear that we're very rapidly losing that, because, there's data to support this. There's science that says that people who are relying on AI are already losing their skills. We're atrophying. Our brains are just muscles, and we're starting to atrophy some of our skill sets. And I worry about that. Listen, I have a calculator, but I still know how to do basic math. I still have to do algebra, perhaps. And I fear we're not going to have that in the future. People are quickly losing the ability to do research. And some never had it. Some are just taking the AI and suddenly they're magically researchers. So they're never going to be able to backtrack when the box lies to them. And I think we have to, I worry about being able to do enough communicating to the customer set, to people who are absorbing this intel, what's good, what's bad, and how to tell the difference. Have you tackled that? Have you seen that challenge? How are you helping message to people, hey, this is good intel, this is bad intel. I know they look and smell the same, but here's the reason why. Or do we need to do more to educate the community on this?
I think in general, we just all professionals need to educate, and especially leadership and decision makers when it comes to that. But also just coming back a little bit more to the AI, there are now a lot of these large language models that can access the internet, but only to some extent. More and more of these are being blocked by certain sources. There are news outlets that prohibit them to touch their web pages, which means it's an information gap for me as an analyst. So, but if I don't understand what it is allowed to search through on the internet, then again, the output of that is still half baked. And that's, I think, the most frustrating point at this point. It's super hard, if not nearly impossible, to understand from all these large language models and all these AIs in the world that are now freely or commercially available, what do they have access to? And more importantly, what don't they have access to? And it could also change, because maybe I estimate today this tool has access to the entire internet, but tomorrow something changed. And now I need to, and if someone ever bothered to read the terms of service of these things, it's books that you need to go through. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge when it comes to this. People, I think leadership and management in general just look at the new technology as a silver bullet solution, where an analyst just pushes a button and now all of a sudden the suspect is found. And I think, and I strongly believe, there will never be silver bullet solutions. There's always a mix between multiple tools and capabilities that will continuously evolve and shift into other tools and capabilities that will go away. And this is why tradecraft is so important. This is why using your brain and using your own reasoning and understanding bias and that kind of stuff and being a devil's advocate with each other in a team is so important, because you will overlook and you will make mistakes. You will jump to conclusions every now and then.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here and argue that there might be a place in analysis for AI in terms of rapidly iterating scenarios and suggesting out-of-the-box ways of looking at the same data set and coming up with different conclusions. Mind you, you're still the analyst and you're still going to make that final call, but at least you can iterate through some scenarios pretty quickly and go, that's preposterous. Wait a minute. No, maybe that is the answer. Occam's razor, whatever.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And this is actually how I experiment with this. And I recently did an experiment where I had a mock-up use case where I built a bunch of scenarios, and I just ran these scenarios and provided it with the information that I collected, and then let this model tell me, hey, what is the most logical outcome, or the most logical scenario that we need to chase first, and then build a list. So that definitely it works. But also just in general for processing large data sets, AI is absolutely great. But then again, now you need to learn. And this is something that I think a lot of people also don't understand. You need to understand the art of prompt engineering. And that's almost a profession on its own. Formulating the right question is just like doing intelligence collection, right? Without having the capability of formulating the right question, you will not get a good answer. And the same counts for these bots.
Yeah, I would say it's not almost a career. It is a career at this point. Like I said, I'm spending a lot of time with AI, and that's exactly what it is. I'm learning prompt engineering on the fly. And again, as you point out, it does feel like Intel. Like it's asking good Intel questions. It's learning how to formulate questions. It's realizing if I ask a question and I get an answer, I'm like, oh, this answer doesn't work right at all. So I've got to reformulate the question to get a better answer. And there's a lot of nuance to it. I'm going iteration after iteration to try to get better results out of some of the tools I'm using. But another piece you had mentioned, we talked about devil's advocate, right? So I'm curious what your thoughts are. There's been some reporting on this. I've written a little on it as well, that, AI all of these AI models are sort of designed to be sycophants. It's been a bit of a vulnerability and a weakness so far, because ultimately these are for-profit platforms, and platforms want people to engage. And if your platform tells you you're an idiot, you're less likely to engage. So it doesn't seem to matter what idea somebody puts forward. It can be the most ridiculous, impossible idea. It seems almost universal that the platform will say, well, at worst, it might say, well, that's really a novel approach. I've never had anybody ask me that question before, which, novel isn't necessarily a compliment, by the way. But it will never just say, that's ridiculous. That would never work. That's a terrible idea. It's illegal. It's immoral. It's dangerous. It's foolhardy, whatever it might be, right? It doesn't seem that the AIs are designed to do that. So I wonder, how you've managed to work through that. It's interesting. You talked about scenarios. So maybe offering multiple scenarios helps, because then it's able to pick a path without feeling that's insulting. But it's hard when I've seen people say, well, I'm going to use this as my devil's advocate. I'm going to be my own Intel team and let AI, be the peer that I bounce ideas off of. That seems very risky to me, because the AI seems to always, from what I've seen, say, well, this is a great idea. Yeah, this is fantastic. And then if you go, wait a minute, I think I should do this way. It goes, oh yeah, you're right. I mean, you can keep telling it things. And go, yeah, you're right. And it's like, you just told me I was right about 5 things that can't all be correct. How have you worked through that? Or what challenges have you seen in that whole sycophantic approach that we're seeing with these AI tools?
Oh, it is absolutely challenging. I think what has worked best for me until now is the analysis from competing hypothesis approach, where that works best for now. So basically giving it a goal and constraints, and then based upon analysis of competing hypothesis, then try to see which scenarios and which pieces of information are consistent or inconsistent based upon facts. The hard part is that some of these large language models are very biased themselves. Well, we've seen examples where you ask it to generate a picture and it generated, let's say, different people of different skin color that were not definitely in that group. And that's something that is so hard for me, or in general for investigators to figure out. What are the limitations, but how is the model trained, and how is it trained from a commercial perspective? Just like you said, these companies have a commercial interest. So they want to make you happy as an end user. And if that means that they will need to tell you something that they think you want to hear, these tools will not hesitate to output that information. And then again, I think that comes down to understanding how to prompt it and just tell it, hey, this is your goals. These are your constraints. This is what you're allowed to do. But even that, I can tell you numerous examples where I gave it very strict constraints and it still had a mind of its own. And I don't have the answer to that. I think at this point, no one in this intelligence community or in general have an answer to that, unless you build and train your own models where you know exactly inside out what happens. But then again, that's a different profession. I'm not trained to build my own models and train those. So this is where I need to rely on someone else, their expertise, and blindly trust them that they will build something that works for my profession. And that's something that I think is something that in the near future will happen more, where there will be companies that will help you train a model that's specifically tailored for what you need to do and the goals that you need to achieve with full transparency.
Yeah, I've experienced that with just scenarios that I've played with, and I get back these results that are like, why are you still talking about this? It's like someone uploaded something about this and you keep referencing it in my response. It's because that's what you have in your database. That's what you know. And I have to prompt it to say, please don't talk about this again. Talk about some other thing. And it's leading me to think, wow, I'm getting some privileged information here. If I tease it a little bit more, it might even tell me what that privileged information is.
Yeah, I know that's come up a lot because of data leakage, right, Rob? I know it's part of what you're talking about is, we do, if you're doing competitive analysis, for instance, a comp intel in our space or marketing, a lot of times you'll ask questions. It's like, this probably shouldn't be in here. I keep getting some very detailed information about this company. I suspect this is probably their IP that leaked out here. I doubt all their pricing models were meant to be public, that kind of a thing. And then it keeps showing up over and over again. It's like, I'm not even asking about that company. I just want to know about the industry in general. Why do you keep giving me what's clearly their content? I don't want their content. And that goes back to some of the, what Nico said, some of the bias, right? There's bias built in based on what data was used to train, and who did it. And so I find that to be challenging because bias, as you guys know, it's such a huge part of what we're trained on, right? It's as Intel professionals, as researchers, we're trained very, to sift out bias, to work with peer reviews on it, to look at our own biases, to do, comparative analysis, to do the structured analytic techniques. But it's hard to do that when the bias is so embedded in the tool that you're using. And sometimes it's very subtle, and you come back and then you got to ask yourself, well, did we use all the sources? Did it pull bias sources? Which sources did it pull? Which is why you got to do all those, the double checks and triple checks on what sources are out there. And you go back and look at the data gaps. Well, are those gaps there because the tool didn't have access or because it chose not to access those, items? And so I find that to be one of the challenges that we don't have when we're doing it manually, right? When I go out on the internet and I do research, I know what websites I'm going to. I know what I'm pulling. I know that I work really hard to be diverse and not just pull from, if it's a political discussion, for instance, not just pull from the left or pull from the right, international versus domestic, all those things, right? And it's hard to know if that's happening with the tool, but the tool does it so fast, and we're all on this such a, budget constraint, time constraint, got to get things done. At some point, I think people just tend to bias. Human nature is to be kind of lazy, unfortunately. I mean, it's evolutionary. I wouldn't say it's unfortunate. It's, if we weren't lazy, we would never have invented the wheel, for instance. We're always looking to be more efficient. And I fear that that's where this is going to go, is the efficiency push. It's just going to lead more and more people down this path. And companies are going to see the value in that, in the output and the numbers, and keep cutting people. And eventually all the people that really know the tradecraft, like you, are going to be gone. And it's just going to be nothing but machines and other machines that are teaching each other worse and worse ways to do things. Until, of course, there's really bad decisions that result in terrible things happening, and then maybe people wake up. But I'm hopeful we avoid that. It's a big fear of mine, and I'm glad we have people like you that are out here still saying, "Hey, we got to work on tradecraft. We got to teach tradecraft. We got to keep it alive. We can't let people forget what's behind all these tools and how they were taught, and we need to teach them better and be able to double check these things."
Yeah, I agree. And I think in general, I think the intelligence space or OSINT has always equal change and new times, new technologies. And we just need to stay on top of that. And we need to be able to understand what these technologies mean for us. The hard part now is it's going at such a fast pace. There's almost every week these models get updates. Last week it was Grok. The week before it was ChatGPT. Then it's Gemini. So every time when I get the feeling, okay, I'm up to speed now, the week after I'm back to the drawing board because they updated all their systems. And I think that's now currently for me, I think in general for everybody, the biggest challenge. Every time when you think you figured it out, you're back to the drawing board because the entire model and the entire algorithm changed that. And that changed literally everything for me that I know so far.
Yeah, I've experienced that. I've had tools that have broken. I've been using a tool and then everything worked the way I wanted it to. And the next week it didn't work at all because somebody in the back end did an update. Go ahead, Rob.
So I know at the beginning we talked about your background, Nico, and I was just wanted to harken back to that to ask, before you were doing what you were doing, were there people doing similar things in the real world? I mean, you're kind of the transition into the digital world, but what did that look like before we had digital?
And that's a good question. I think historically a lot of librarians did what I like to call OSINT type work. They're just really good at indexing large amounts of information and making sense of that and contextualizing that for others to be able to find what they need to find. So I think when you look at the history in general, I think journalists, librarians, they were doing what I like to call the very first steps of this tradecraft that we're talking about. They were the first ones into this. Same counts for when you look at World War I and World War II, people that were reading all the newspapers from all the world, listening into all the radio outlets of the world, and collecting information from that way. So basically, singles intelligence has always been part of open source intelligence, because there's just a lot of radio waves that can be intercepted for free without restrictions that can really give you great insights and intel on what to expect or what to know. So yeah, I hope it answers your question. That's at least how I look at it most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a journalist, so I appreciate the nod there to the research that goes into writing a story and making sure that it's absolutely correct. It's the same thing in the intelligence world. You want to make sure that the intel that you're passing on for decision makers is absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the nod to librarians is great too. We had somebody on the show not long ago who's in this space now, OSINT, but came out of library sciences originally. So you can see that overlap of being able to do that kind of a research, right? I think that's a skill set that really should transcend, right? We should all be working harder to continue to work on the research aspect of this, because it's not going away. The new technologies and the new aspects are there, but we're all going to have to be able to do good research. I got one last question on my mind, and we'll see if it gets edited out later. But I'm curious about your thoughts. So we talked about OSINT. We talked about your background, right? Where do you see like deep and dark web fitting in when we talk about OSINT? Are you mostly surface web? Are you also going into the deep and dark web? And what are you seeing as a comparative value there? They all have different content in them. Do you spend time there? How do you keep yourself safe there, for instance? And what do you see as the comparative value between them?
Yeah, of course, I use all the layers of the internet. So deep, dark, surface web. I think I have to say honestly that 90% of my time I spend on the surface web. And for me, it always made perfect sense, because let's say I'm that local cocaine dealer and I have some crack cocaine to offer. It would make no sense for that person to set up a dark web page on the Tor network, right, have that one listing up there that no one can find. His clients are on the streets. And
the local crackheads on the street aren't pulling them up on the phone or going to the dark web to find them, you don't think?
And that's probably the kids in the local university or somewhere else. So he needs to have a Snapchat account or, I don't know, a Facebook account or a BeReal account to get the word out. So I think 90% of all cases, most things that I ever had to investigate, but also our customers need to investigate, is surface web. Of course, there's a huge need for the deep web, because the deep web, for those, again, who don't know, is just a layer in the internet, but it's just not indexed by search engines. So, and it makes sense, right? Your work from home portal, there's no need for Google to index that. There's no added value for that. You know that URL, you know how to find it. But for me, finding that URL or just understanding that you're using a Microsoft suite could give, let's say, a pen testing team just enough to send out something. So I definitely use it. The dark web has become a little bit less important, which also has to do with all the large crackdowns that has happened in the recent years. The waterbed effect is actually happening, where we see less and less criminal activity on the dark web, but more on the service web. And hiding in plain sight is probably easier now than just hiding on the dark web, because the dark web is this small. So chances of you being found in, let's say, a haystack of information on the dark web that, well, I think on its high rise, I think currently Tor web pages are around 10 to 12,000 pages that are actively being maintained. Just knowing that Google on a typical day indexes 300,000 new pages that they have never indexed before. So where's my value? Where's my information? Most likely on the clear web. Doesn't mean that I don't want to look there, but it's definitely not my first resort to go to. It's most of the time a mix of clear web and deep web that sometimes will lead me into the dark web.
Well, thank you, Nico. This has been a great conversation. We look forward to having you back on the show sometime in the future. And you can find out more about Nico, and more information about him is available on our website, which is at authenticate.com/needlestack. That's authentic with the number 8.com/needlestack. And we'd like to thank our audience for listening. We always appreciate you guys being there. Please send us a note. Let us know what you like, what you don't like about the show. We'd be happy to respond to that. And follow us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, Mastodon, You can follow us at Needle Stack Pod. And be sure to subscribe to us wherever you're listening to this podcast today. All right. Until next time, thank you.